I'm your host, Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Welcome to today's Rupa University live class presented by Rupa Health, the simplest way to order specialty lab work. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I'll be your host for this afternoon. Excuse me. Today we have a very, very special guest in Dr. Brent Dorval, CSO of KBMO Diagnostics, here to talk about their food sensitivity testing and the power of combining IGG, complement, and the newly added Zonulin test. So before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you have any questions, feel free to use that Q&A button on the bottom right, and we'll host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Immediately following the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order these tests on Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries at all. We'll be sending out a recording of the presentation along with the slides within the next few days. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Brent Dorval. He has over 35 years experience in strategic management of research, manufacturing, and regulatory affairs in the area of medical devices and diagnostics. Most recently, he's founded the Brendan BioScience to capitalize on patients covering new immunoassay methods for analyte detection. Dr. Dorval holds a PhD in medical microbiology and immunology from the College of Medicine at The Ohio State University and performed postdoctoral studies and was a visiting scholar in the Department of Chemistry at MIT. In addition, Dr. Dorval was the advisor to the World Health Organization Committee on Vaccines and Diagnostics in Geneva. So with that, thank you so much, Dr. Dorval. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'd like to pass the reins over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, and pleasure to be giving this talk today to everybody. So today we're going to talk about the FIT test, so food sensitivities, and we're going to look at the role of food sensitivity tests and then how that affects the clinical outcomes when you use the FIT test as a tool for kind of evidence-based medicine. Now, just a few objectives I think that we'll cover pretty completely today. So we'd like to take and look at the role of gut permeability and food sensitivities and inflammation. So food sensitivities and inflammation, you'll see as we go through this talk, are intimately associated. Food sensitivities and the symptoms are generated by inflammation caused by a number of factors, but one of them especially is complement. We're going to take a look at C3D testing and food sensitivities. So that C3D is the inflammatory component that we measure on immune complexes, and that indicates inflammation. And we're going to discuss the benefits of food sensitivity testing and with patient compliance and clinical outcomes at the very end of the talk. We're going to look at the role of inflammation as the root cause in chronic condition, a wide variety, and then explain the role of zonulin in gut permeability and then how that translates into food sensitivities. So a few definitions just by way of introduction. So a food allergy, we won't be discussing that today, but that's the so-called IgE-mediated type 1 hypersensitivity, and that's immediate reactivity to a food or some environmental allergen. You know, those usually happen in just a few minutes and can be quite severe and life-threatening. Food sensitivity, which we will discuss in detail today, is an immunologic reaction to food, types 2 and 3, and it's mediated by IgA or IgG, and it's DTH, meaning delayed type hypersensitivity. It may take 2 days, 3 days to show up, so it's so-called delayed. We won't be addressing IgA per se today, and we're going to focus on IgG and IgG immune complexes. And food intolerance, again, just to mention it, that's a non-immunologic reaction to food, and that's best typified by enzyme deficiency and something like lactose intolerance, where you have a deficiency in the enzyme lactase, which actually can be quite severe. Overview, again, some just general ideas. Food sensitivity and a related disease affect at least 100 million people worldwide, and that's very conservative. The prevalence at least recently, is greater than 50% of the adults and children have some sort of food sensitivity. And again, this has cropped up in the past few years. The symptoms are wide and varied, and could be skin rashes, headaches, chronic intestinal diseases, you name it. There's a lot of various symptoms that are associated with the things that we consume. And this is pretty well known that most of the sensitivities, 90%, are really in 8 food groups, the so-called big 8: milk, soy, eggs, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. So that's the main groups that really cause the preponderance of food sensitivities. A concept is that either one or all foods in a specific group may cause food sensitivity. And the concept there is cross-reactivity. You could have one food in a group that causes a sensitivity, and it may not translate into other members of that group to have a sensitivity to those foods, or it may be one protein in a particular member of that group. It's contained in all the members, so that you'd have broad cross-reactivity and you'd have a broad sensitivity to all or most of the members in that particular food family. Again, as I mentioned, this is delayed type hypersensitivities, and they occur hours or days after food ingestion. And the concept that we will hammer home today is delayed food sensitivities are caused by IgG 1 through 4, which form immune complexes and then activate complement. And when they activate complement, that's when you generate inflammation and the symptoms that are associated with food sensitivities. Now, again, just general concepts. There's the innate versus acquired immunity. And so there's 3 basic levels of defense in the body. The first are the barrier. Everybody's familiar: skin, mucous membranes, stomach acid and enzymes, and also gut bacteria, which coat the intestine and prevent other foods or other bacteria or viruses from getting through to the gut epithelium. The innate immunity is formed by white blood cells, so WBC. Those are neutrophils and macrophages, which generally what they do is they phagocytize, meaning they eat, they engulf bacteria, viruses, and foreign proteins. Then they degrade them so that they can be gotten rid of in a normal fashion. Now, what helps innate immunity tremendously is complement. So what happens is bacteria become opsonized. They get coated with C3b. It's a complement fragment, and I'll point that out in a few slides after this. And what happens is there's receptors on macrophages that bind to the C3b. It makes it much more efficient at engulfing and removing the bacteria. And also when you get immune complexes. So if you get a food that causes an IgG antibody, what happens is you get an immune complex form, and then it later can activate complement, and that has important ramifications in immune complex clearance. And then there's the acquired limb of the immune system. Those are also white blood cells, mostly T cells, T cytotoxic, T helper, and antigen presenting cells. And they actively destroy cancer cells or cells that have been infected by viruses and the like. And the B cells are an important feature of the acquired immune system. They produce antibodies, and the ones we'll focus on today will be IgG 1 through 4 and the ramifications of the immune complexes when they bind to the antigen. Now, just a very general picture of the gut. So if we start on the upper left-hand side, foods and additives, they enter, you ingest them, they enter the lumen of the gut, and you have the columnar epithelium. What happens is that fragments, once the tight junctions between the cells are opened up by inflammation, food fragments get through the columnar epithelium, the lamina propria, and they activate the antigen presenting cells, number 7, T cells, number 9, and B cells, And ultimately what they do is they generate IgG against these dietary peptides and proteins. So this is the so-called acquired immune system. You're acquiring the ability to produce an antibody against a particular antigen. What happens is the antibody's formed, it forms an immune complex. And when it does that, what happens is immune complexes are deposited in tissues, complement is activated, and when that happens, these two molecules are immediately generated, C3a and C5a, the so-called anaphylotoxins, and those cause the inflammation that generate the symptoms that we see in many food sensitivities. Now, let's focus a little bit on step 12 in the next picture and take a look at an IgG antibody. Now, this is a typical IgG antibody where you have the antigen binding site. So that's where the food antigen would bind. You have a C3d binding site. So that's a region of the antibody in IgG 1, 2, and 3 that binds the complement component. And then the very tail end of the molecule that's labeled COOH, or the carboxy terminal, that's the complement binding site, which initiates the cascade, the complement cascade that we'll discuss in a second. So what's important is look at that red star where you see C3d binding. The FIT test by KBMO takes advantage of the fact that we not only measure the IgG antibody, so the acquired part of the immune system, we also take advantage of another handle, if you will, the C3d binding site, or the innate. So the complement is the innate part of the immune system. So we use two parts of this particular antibody to then form a detection system for the FIT test. So this is a very simplified diagram or pictogram of complement activation and the formation of immune complexes with C3d. But what you can see is on the upper left, what happens is the classical pathways activated by antigen-antibody complexes. So the antigen could be a food antigen. The antibody is an IgG 1 through 4. It forms an immune complex and it activates the C1q. So that's the first component. And then what happens after that is it forms what they call a C3 convertase, which is an enzyme. But what's very important there is that at that point where the immune complex activates C3 and forms the convertase, C3a, this molecule is released, which causes the inflammation. So just focus on that. What happens after that is the C3b that is on the immune complex gets cleaved one more time to a component called C3d, which remains on the immune complex right here. So the FIT test measures the immune complex antibody plus the C3d, or the inflammatory component. Now, in many cases, what happens is if this system, which has a series of tight controls, is allowed to continue, the C5 convertase is formed, which is another enzyme. Just think of it as an enzyme. And you generate another molecule, C5a, which then causes increased inflammation and so-called the membrane attack complex, MAC, and you get cell lysis and more activation. So as the activation of complement ensues, what you have is deposition, you have generation of inflammation, and then potentiation of inflammation if this cascade goes all the way to cell lysis and activation. It can do tremendous damage in kidneys, in the heart, in the gut, and elsewhere in the body. Now, so the question becomes, so we have a test, and I'll show you the mechanics of that shortly, when do providers use the FIT test? That's a fair question. So in general, a patient will come in and they'll present with a variety of symptoms that may be associated with food sensitivities. And here are a few. Certain autoimmune diseases are potentiated by food sensitivities. Thyroid, arthritis, brain fog, fatigue is a big one. And digestive and gut issues are a huge issue with many people that have food sensitivities. Then you have fibroids, endometriosis, and breast cancer. But this is the short list, but when you look at this list and say, what do they have in common? The common denominator here is inflammation. So the ability of a test to use a marker, C3D, like the FIT test, and measure inflammation is very, very important. And it will be, as you will see, it's very important in clinical outcomes. Again, immune complexes and inflammation may be associated with many diseases, and the underlying problem for many conditions seen by physicians and providers on a daily basis. Again, this is just a simplified of the innate immunity, the antigen antibody, and complement activation. So it shows the interplay of those components. And complement is kind of a very complex system of proteins. We just didn't happen on this and say, oh, wake up one day and say, let's measure complement. I've been studying complement for 35 years. So we took a careful and measured approach to developing a test that would take and benefit from using the knowledge of immune complexes and complement activation, and then understanding how to measure inflammation through C3D. So it was a time-consuming process to develop this assay, but we thought it was certainly a worthwhile endeavor. Now, so again, just trying to hit this home a little bit. So the FIT test employs dual pathway measurement. Other tests out there, as you see, only measure the acquired immunity, antibodies, IgG 1 through 4. The FIT test measures IgG 1 through 4 and innate immunity, which is complement C3D. So that's a very important concept when thinking about this test. Now, here's the nuts and bolts of what we've been talking about and why this test is so good. So if you look on the left side of this pictogram, what you see is a conventional conjugate generates one signal. And that is explained very simply. This antibody, which comes from blood or from a serum sample, binds to the food antigen in red. And what happens is, to detect this antibody, a conjugate's used that's an anti-IgG HRP. So just think of it as a simple detection reagent. So, and in this particular format, a conventional test, you only get one signal at a time, just one. Now, what we did is we added the complement pathway to this. So we call it an enhanced conjugate, and we generate two signals. So we take advantage of the antibody, which binds to the food antigen. So we, like the other tests, we measure IgG 1 through 4. But unlike the other tests, that little green C3D component that's bound to the antibody, we use a second conjugate to detect that. So what we've effectively done is we've taken and added a signal for the C3D is additive to the signal to the IgG. So we generate two signals at the same time. So what does that do? It gives you better sensitivity because you generate twice the signal, and you get much better specificity because you don't have to use as much of the conjugate. The more conjugate that you use, especially IgG conjugates, they're very good at generating a signal, but they're many times become non-specific. So you end up with a test, and unlike the FIT test where you have 6 or 8 or 10 foods that are positive and you get very pronounced reactivity, you may have 20, 25 foods, which is impossible to really design an elimination diet around. So just remember, so the acquired and innate immune system generates two signals, and that's the basis of the FIT test. So just an overview of the FIT test. You probably all know this, but the FIT test measures up to 176 foods, colorings, additives, and we've added zonulin, which is very exciting, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. We use a Fingerstick, a so-called dried blood spot, which enables quick and easy way to obtain a sample. So you can use a typical serum sample, that's fine, but a lot of people prefer to do a simple Fingerstick, quick, easy, send it in, easy to ship, and people prefer this these days. The patient report may be an indication of leaky gut, and we'll point that out. So if you have a lot of foods that are positive, say maybe 10 to 15, Candida is positive, so Candida albicans, and also if you had a high zonulin, when you put those three together, it's like the perfect storm. In many cases, that leads to leaky gut and gut-associated issues. We have best-in-class compliance tools. So we have a easy, intuitive report. Within 10 seconds, you'll scan this report and you'll know exactly what it means. We have an app that takes and captures that information in a report for your phone. So if you're out to eat, or if you're in the supermarket and buying food, you can look at the app and say, oh, okay, I'm sensitive to these particular foods. So you make sure that you either don't consume them in the restaurant or don't buy the foods when you're in the particular supermarket. And then we provide a general diet plan that gives some guidance to the patient that if you're sensitive to certain foods, what alternatives you may have so that you'd have a nutritious diet. Now, let's talk a little bit about zonulin. People probably have heard this and of this protein, and it's a little fuzzy from time to time. And I think I can simplify that for you. So here's a very simple pictogram. In short, zonulin is a protein that's produced in liver and kidney. It's relatively small, just by way, it's about 47 kilodaltons. But what it does is it opens up tight junctions between the columnar epithelium on the gut. So what happens is zonulin takes and binds to an adjacent cell, and it breaks up proteins that keep these cells close, a so-called tight junction. So when they break, zonulin causes them to break, they form a pore. And as you could see, and you saw in the previous slide, foods can now get through this columnar epithelium into the lamina propria, activate the cells, and now produce your IgG and immune complexes. There we go, excuse me. So what happens effectively is zonulin is the key that opens the gate. And one protein that you've heard about, I'm sure, is a wheat protein, gliadin. Gliadin actually binds to a receptor on the epithelial cell and causes zonulin to be produced, which then binds to a different receptor on a cell and then causes the opening of the tight junction. But effectively, what you got is two cells that there was no pore in between them, tight junction, are now opened by zonulin. Now what happens is food from the lumen of the gut and other particles can get through and cause this wide variety of antibodies to be produced that ultimately end up in food sensitivities for a wide variety of people. Now, this is a little bit more complicated slide, but I think it's still simplified enough so that you can really kind of see the mechanics of zonulin. And when you explain it to your patients, I think this sort of thing will help quite a bit. So what happens is just the example we're going to use here, it could be other things, but gliadin from wheat binds to a receptor on this columnar epithelium, and it goes to the nucleus. And then the nucleus is triggered to form and make zonulin, which is then secreted back into the lumen. That binds to the same cell or an adjacent cell. And then what happens is this red band is occludin, the blue one is claudin, and it pulls these two proteins apart like a rubber band. You can think of it just like that. And now these little colored food particles get right through the cells, say, oh boy, those foods shouldn't be here. And you start to activate T cells, antigen presenting cells, and B cells. And then ultimately you generate antibodies and immune complexes. Now, one important thing is that when zonulin gets through the cells there, the T and B cells and antigen presenting cells say, wait a minute, zonulin shouldn't be here. So now we're going to generate an anti-zonulin antibody that will now bind to zonulin and get rid of it, remove it from the body, and that's a normal process. So what we've done, I think, with our zonulin assay is kind of clever. Instead of measuring the zonulin protein over here that's been released, which there's a number of problems with measuring that protein, and we'll discuss those. What we're going to do is take advantage of the fact that these B cells produce anti-zonulin, which indicates zonulin's been released and that you have leaky gut. So it's kind of a surrogate marker, much like C3D tells you that complement's been activated. Anti-zonulin tells you that zonulin's been produced, and the net effect of zonulin is to generate an open pore and leaky gut. So again, just an overview of zonulin in general. It's synthesized in the intestine and liver cells and other cells. It's a key biomarker for intestinal permeability. So this is the protein itself. However, it's a reversible regulator of intestinal permeability, meaning that once you stop producing zonulin, meaning the inflammatory trigger has been removed, zonulin production decreases, and these tight junctions will reform over time. So remember that, that leaky gut is a reversible process. It takes time. So very often when patients are on an elimination diet, it will take time for the gut to heal and for them to get much better symptom-wise and reduce their sensitivities. And as we discussed a little earlier, elevated zonulin are associated with a wide variety of autoimmune, celiac, non-celiac, gluten sensitivity, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. And this list is growing every day. Every time I go to the literature, a new study has come out where zonulin has been implicated in some aspect of a disease. Now, does it cause the entire disease? Maybe not. But what it does is it exacerbates the symptoms that are associated with these diseases. So it's a very, very important modulator. So it can intensify the symptoms. Now, we'll discuss here just the problems with zonulin protein. So this is the protein, not the antibody. And again, many of you people probably know cross-reactivity is the death knell for these zonulin protein assays because they cross-react with haptoglobin, which is a serum protein, properdin, other complement fragments. And what the net effect of that is they block zonulin binding, and the result is in very low positivity rates. So you'll test for zonulin protein, and the rates will be, 1% or 2% or less even. So the other proteins block zonulin binding. So effectively, you can't see it, meaning you can't measure it. And what other component is critical here is sample timing. The concentration in serum varies widely during the day, which results in difficulty getting an accurate measurement. In one report, they found that zonulin protein can actually vary significantly in concentration in the serum in just 4 minutes. So that tells you if you're trying to get an accurate sample or a sample from a patient to measure zonulin, that's a very, very tricky, and it depends on, the timing for sure. Now, the sample type for these assays, serum and also fecal can be used. We've used mostly serum in the lab. Now, why did we move to the zonulin antibody? Just for those reasons is number one, cross-reactivity is eliminated. We use a very unique recombinant zonulin protein that eliminates binding to haptoglobin, properdin, and complement fragments and just prevents cross-reactivity. And I'm just going to digress here for a second. Nobody else in the world has this unique recombinant zonulin. We developed it at KBMO. If you look at other zonulin that have been produced by other people or other labs, it's not the same protein. We used a unique approach to give a full-length human recombinant zonulin that's fully glycosylated, which is very important. But it eliminates cross-reactivity, so now you can measure the antibody. So what we see then as a result is the positivity rate has increased quite a bit because we're not looking at a protein that goes up and down or is blocked by other proteins. We're looking at an antibody that stays relatively stable in concentration over, at least a couple of weeks, if not more. So the sample timing is not nearly as critical. And the other important thing that we've done here at KBMO is we use serum. That's a standard sample. We also use dried blood spots. And we, of course, do not use fecal samples at all. But again, with dried blood spots, it becomes a question for many people. Well, how accurate, how sensitive are they with respect to comparing them to serum or plasma, let's say? And if you carefully control the amount of the blood spot, the storage of the blood spot, and how it's diluted and extracted, what's been shown by a paper that looked at probably 50 different studies shown that blood spots and serum or plasma are comparable, certainly in the 95 to 99% comparable when you look at the results. So dried blood spots are a reliable, relatively inexpensive, stable way to ship a sample, and people overwhelmingly seem to prefer that these days. So it's a very, very good sample type. Now, so we call this the next generation zonulin. Again, it's a zonulin antibody screening assay, and we use a unique recombinant zonulin that was developed at KBMO. And that means we cloned it, we purify it, we own it, and it's a unique sequence that nobody else has. We just launched this in the past couple of days, and it is exclusive to KBMO. And zonulin, again, it measures IgG antibody, which is more stable and specific marker than the zonulin protein. So that's the takeaway here. So it's a surrogate marker, but it indicates the same thing. If you have a high level of zonulin antibody, IgG, then that indicates zonulin's been released, and most likely you have opening of tight junctions and you have leaky gut as a result. And again, what's nice is it's an ELISA format using serum, or again, the dried blood spot. And Dr. Fasano, who is the discoverer of zonulin, used these sample types in his research. So that's a pretty good recommendation. We use the same sample type. And the dream team, of course, we put Dr. Fasano first because he discovered this molecule, and he's partnering with the company. And I have the good fortune of being associated with him and benefiting from all his knowledge. So the FIT 132 and the FIT 176 will include zonulin screening assay as soon as we launch, and we launched. So that means that you order the food sensitivity test and you get a marker of tight junction opening and leaky gut included right in with the food sensitivity test. So what we look there is, again, the combination of many foods that have high reactivity, Candida albicans, if that's positive. So Candida is normal flora. When it overgrows in certain disease states, it can become problematic and indicate leaky gut. And then when you put that together with zonulin antibody being high, it just tells the practitioner there's a high likelihood of leaky gut. So travel down that path when investigating any potential food sensitivity. So it's a nice triad that kind of helps the practitioner in a very significant way. So the clinical studies that are based on this particular test, we've done 2 of them. The first one was a retrospective test that looked at 30 patients. So we combed the database out of thousands, and we just randomly selected a group that were tested before and after using the test. So what we did was, on the left-hand panel, what you can see is the initial results. So the patient came in essentially on day 1. We took a sample, and then we measured the severe, high, and moderate reactivities to a variety of foods. But then we also did a questionnaire. What symptoms are you having? Whether it's headaches, whether it's diarrhea, stomach problems, fatigue, those sorts of things. So we did a survey of the symptoms. So we got a sense of what their antibody reactivity was to a variety of foods, and then also what the symptoms were. Then we tested them about 10.7 months later. So what we found, and I love these sorts of graphs, I don't have to bore you with statistics, is that you can see a dramatic reduction in severe, high, and moderate severity score of their symptomology. So again, so no one is cured by taking these tests. But for instance, a person may have come in and they say, look, I have pretty severe headaches 2 or 3 times a week, and I have to take a medication, or they're pretty debilitating. After you've identified food sensitivities, the 11 months later, they may come in and say, yeah, I still get a headache, but it's every couple of weeks, and it's not nearly as severe as it used to be. So what you've done is you've identified foods using this test that, if removed from the diet, will ultimately remove or reduce inflammation, and then reduce the symptoms. So the patient, again, you don't cure them, but they feel a lot better. And that's the goal of this test, is to identify foods, and if you get the right ones, the patient feels better. And so what we found as a conclusion is a significant reduction in sensitivities reported after the elimination diet. And this indicates, very importantly, that the FIT test could predict specific food sensitivities. So that's what you want a test to do: empirical evidence, make a prediction, and have that prediction come true. And so that's what the FIT test does in this regard. So that's a retrospective study. So then we moved into a larger study, and we looked at irritable bowel syndrome. And that is like, of all the symptoms you see with food sensitivities, it's certainly one of the largest that we see in the patients that we're accustomed to testing. And just by way of occurrence, so 18% of North Americans have IBS of one varying degree or another. Medical care is huge. 25% seek primary or secondary care symptoms, and 5% are actually seen in a tertiary care setting, so an ER or hospital setting. The cost is sizable direct costs for physicians, ER, and the varied diagnostic tests and all the medications that people are given to try to treat IBS. So what this adds up to is it has a high occurrence, it's very costly, and that patients very often end up on medications for long-term, which is not really where you want to be. If you can treat it using an elimination diet, try to identify a food and remove it, we feel that's probably a better approach than taking a medication, unless you need to. Now, so we looked at an IBS study, and we evaluated the health benefits and outcomes of IBS and food sensitivity using the FIT test, which measures IgG and C3d containing immune complexes. The PI for this was William Esselfy, who's an MD, and we did the study out in a clinic out in California. Now, So I'm just going to give you the very top level view here. So the results were, if we look at the IBS severity score, so you have a standard way to look at the severity score. 0 is you don't have it, and 500 is you have a very severe case. So we look at the intervention group. And it can be you look at the symptoms and decrease in symptoms basically over time. Intervention, you had a 127-point decrease. When we compared that to the control group, it was a 46-point decrease. So you can see a very significant decrease compared to the control group. So that's a positive outcome. When we looked at homocysteine, which is a good marker of kidney function from day 1 to the end of the study, what you're looking for obviously is less than 15 micromoles per liter, but in the intervention group, we had a 5 micromole decrease, very significant. And in the control group, it actually went up 6.4 micromoles. So very significant decrease, has important implications in kidney function. Then we look at CRP. CRP is C-reactive protein. And C-reactive protein is a general marker of inflammation. It won't tell you what causes the inflammation, but it will tell the healthcare provider that inflammation is going on, so you better dig deeper and see if you can find it. For instance, you get high CRP, perhaps in cancer, perhaps in infectious disease, or in other inflammatory processes associated with food sensitivities. So when we look at the intervention group here, we see a 0.5 mg per liter decrease, and a control group is a 0.1 mg per liter decrease. So what you can see across the board here in 3 key markers is the FIT test has the ability to predict that if people remove certain foods from the diet, that the markers that are key to predicting disease will uniformly decrease. So the results, again, just some further results. This is very interesting. So the hospital stays and visits, there was a 10% reduction in the intervention group. That means the people that followed the results from the FIT test. And the primary care physician and specialist office visits were reduced 50%. So that has important ramifications right across the board. You know, nobody wants to end up in the hospital or go to office visits. So obviously it has benefits to the patient, but it obviously has important implications to various insurance companies, right? 10% reduction in hospital, you're going to save a lot of money across the board, as well as the office visits as well. But in general, what it does is it benefits the patient. The symptoms are reduced, inflammation's reduced, patients feel better, and the markers in this study pretty much demonstrate that. And again, this was based on 100 patients that were in randomized groups. So this is a very, very nice study indeed. So when we look at just the overall conclusions, the FIT test resulted in twice the IBS severity score reduction compared with cellular tests. So we all know there's other tests out there that measure the shrinking and swelling of cells and try to correlate that to food sensitivity. They never really measure anything other than the size of the cell or the outside volume. They do not measure any analytes per se. And it shows that the FIT test is quite a bit better. And also the FIT test resulted in 50% improvement with test that measures IGG only. So this shows you that when you add the measurement of the innate immune system, so the complement C3D, to the measurement of the IgG or the acquired immune system, you get much better predictive outcome. So that's very, very important. So the conclusion overall is clinical outcomes for IBS are greatly improved when using the FIT test to predict food sensitivities. And I think that's all you can ask from a test. You take it, it gives you a certain result, you follow the results, and overwhelmingly you feel better. So we feel very, very good that this test is actually doing something that's clinically relevant. So overall, again, multi-pathway detection, IgG, the acquired immune system, and it also measures the innate immune system complement. And then complement generates inflammation. So we test for that inflammation by measuring C3D. So the C3D tells you that C3A, which is really the molecule that causes inflammation, has been released, and that inflammation will result. Anti-zonulin is antibody is a good marker of gut permeability, and that will be offered on the FIT 132 and 176 in every single assay that you use to run at KBMO. And we have excellent clinical outcomes backed by an IRB approved clinical study. So the study that I just discussed by Dr. Esselfy was IRB approved. So with that, we covered a lot of ground today. I think a lot of important concepts, and I'll open up the floor for any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation, Dr. Dorval. We got a ton of questions during the presentation, so let's just go ahead and hop right into it. So first question, which is actually a pretty important question, is this test available to New York providers?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yep. And just to clarify on that one, y'all, you would have to order directly through KBMO in order to get that. If you are located in New York, New Jersey, or Rhode Island, currently through Rupa Health, you are unable to order within those states, but ordering directly through KBMO, you can get access to this test within New York. Perfect. Question number 2, what is the difference between KBMO tests and US Biotech, Cyrex, so on and so forth?
Again, those tests take advantage of only one pathway. They measure the acquired immune system or antibody only. The difference is the KBMO FIT test takes advantage of the fact that we measure the IgG component, the acquired, but we also measure the innate immune system, the inflammatory component, C3D. And we generate a much higher signal, which gives you better sensitivity and better specificity. So that's the key difference. We measure and get 2 signals. Other tests just are really unidimensional and only measure one limb of the immune system.
Beautiful. Thank you for clarifying that. The next question is in regards to Fingerstick versus Serum draws. What are your thoughts on in regards to just the reliability of comparing the 2 Fingerstick versus Serum, since this is a Fingerstick test?
Yeah, very good. That is an oft asked question. And let's put it this way. We did one study in-house where we used blood spots and matched serum, and we got greater than 95% correspondence between the 2. Now, that's an in-house study. So to expand this even more, a recent paper just came out that looked at probably 50 different studies that you dry blood spots. And what they've shown overwhelmingly is as long as you carefully control blood spots, the storage, the dilution, the extraction, and you're well versed in that serum and plasma samples and dried blood spots are comparable, and it's greater than 95, even 99%. But the trick is you've got to be careful, more careful in how you process these samples. So that's the difference. But when you, as a provider, see the test and you see serum and you see blood spot, for all intents and purposes, what you see is no difference between those 2 sample types.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Next question is, does this test require provoking? If so, how much, and when should patient ingest food that is thought to be allergen?
Yeah. Again, what I talk to lots of providers and some patients. What we try to stay away from is giving too much direction on provoking an antibody response, just because there's always a potential that there's an IgE component to any provocation. And if IgE were to be an issue, then you have an immediate hypersensitivity. So having said that, we're very, very circumspect about that. But what we find is that if an individual were to eliminate a food from the diet, let's say for 2 or 3 months, something like that, in general, the antibody response will go down precipitously. The half-life of IgG in serum is about 3 or 4 weeks. So that means every 3 weeks, half as much antibody is in the serum. In 4 weeks, half of that. So it goes down pretty quickly in most, but not all people. So what happens is if after, like I say, 3 months, you ate that food again, maybe on Monday and Tuesday, what happens is you will provoke a response in those people that are sensitive to that particular food, and the antibody will return to pretty high levels. I would say you're probably looking at maybe around 3 days to 5 days. And it's much like almost looking like a vaccine, right? Where you get a vaccine, you produce a very high titer. Now that titer goes away over time, but now you see the virus or the bacterium or that particular protein, and the body has already been taught to recognize that antigen and produce an antibody. So in a couple days, you get a rapid and robust antibody response. The same thing happens with food.
Wonderful. So the next question will be regarding just this test setup. So is Zonulin now considered an additional add-on? Is it included? And for individuals who have existing FIT tests in their office, will those kits test the Zonulin automatically? The requisition form does not indicate.
Yes, those tests will automatically include Zonulin. And I'll let James White address the exact cost of that. But I think it's going to be an additional $10 for the 132 and $10 for the 176. So the patient and the provider get tremendous value by this inclusion, and it's an inclusion that will be in addition to the inflammatory component C3D.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. The next questions here, y'all. Let me just there's a lot of questions coming in, so I apologize. I have to scroll up just a little bit to get them all in. What are the main sources of gliadin in the diet where our immune system misidentifies as gluten? They hear sometimes coffee and dairy fit the bill.
Yeah, I mean, those are coffee and dairy would contain certain sequences of gliadin that kind of mimic what actual gliadin from wheat would be. So what happens is you get the concept of cross-reactivity. So that means that somebody that's gliadin sensitive is probably not going to tolerate, or certainly would be advised not to eat coffee or wheat, or maybe even some sort of milk products. And that's because the cross-reactivity of coffee may provoke a response that would otherwise be provoked by gliadin. So that's the concept of cross-reactivity. And many times, cross-reactivities are obvious. Like I say, within a group, like apples and within the rose family, you could say, oh yeah, they're all related. They're very similar. I can understand why they would cross-react. And you say, well, now we have wheat and we have coffee or yeast. Why on earth would they cross-react when they're so different? And it's just that they contain so many different proteins. The chances are of getting certain sequences that could mimic the sequence of a gliadin is very high. So they'll crop up from time to time, but they may not be obvious.
Perfect. The next question is just a little bit of a callback for the IBS study that you mentioned previously.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the time frame on which that study was conducted?
The time, I mean, insofar as
I am not positive. Don't have any more context beyond just the time frame question.
the time frame. Well, what I can tell you is that they eliminated the food from the diet, and it's probably going to be in the same range as the previous study. Certainly more than 6 months, probably in the 8 to 10 months. Because in the initial elimination, what happens is the antibody is cleared from the body, but those B cells are still there, and they're waiting to see that antigen again. So if you only eliminate like 6 to 8 weeks, and if you have leaky gut, in 6 to 8 weeks, leaky gut, meaning the tight junctions are open, they don't reform, most of them, in that time. So what happens in these types of clinical studies, you want to identify the foods that causes sensitivity in the elimination phase. And then when you identify them there, what you want to do is then wait that 6, 8, 10 months. And different providers have different protocols. So what's happening after 10 months that doesn't happen after a few weeks? And what happens is the tight junctions reform. So the gut is no longer porous. What happens is the B cells become quiescent. So instead of in the proliferative stage and generating large amounts of antibody almost immediately, you have to stimulate the proliferation again. The other thing that happens is antibody is all but gone, all but totally cleared from the body. So your gut's healed, your cells, the B cells making the antibody have become quiescent, and the antibody that it could be reactive is gone. So that 10-month is a good place to then reintroduce a food to say, okay, if this person eats this food on Monday and Tuesday, what happens on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday? And sometimes what you'll see is you get a couple different responses. Sometimes that patient after 10 months, they'll eat that food on Monday and Tuesday, and by Wednesday, they'll have their symptoms come back again. You'll have another group of individuals that after 10 months, they'll eat that food Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they'll feel fine. You try it again the next week, same result. So they seem to have the ability, once those cells become dormant and the gut reheals itself, they seem to shake the food sensitivity, so to speak. And it's probably related to other aspects of the individuals that you can't perfectly control. And those are the immune response genes, of which there are more than 40. So which means cytokines and other cell types which overlay themselves on just a simple production of antibody. So you have a genetic component where some people may be able to shake, so-called, the allergy, and other people never will.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So the next question would be in regards to a Genova test. So Genova has an intestinal permeability test as well. In regards to the zonulin marker, do you know if it's more accurate than the lactose and mannitol markers?
I don't. I'm broadly familiar with both of those markers. They are a good measure of gut permeability. What I can tell you is this zonulin marker is going to be definitely less expensive, and I would say equally as accurate. I mean, those other tests I think are quite a bit more difficult and probably more expensive. So I think that would be the difference. But those are kind of historical tests, but they do test for gut permeability, and my understanding is they're quite effective in that regard.
Okay, perfect. And just a quick call out, y'all. We are at the hour. We're going to continue with this Q&A. I want to be able to get through as many questions as possible, but if you do have to jump, no worries at all. Just to reiterate, we're going to send out a copy of this session as well as the slides. So you have to jump, that's fine, but we would love for you to stay on. And immediately following this Q&A, I'm going to walk through and show you how you can order this test directly from Rupa Health. So with that, let's just jump right in again.
Sure.
The next question would be, why not measure also IgA since it's looking at mucosal membranes?
Certainly glad you asked that. We just finished development of that test, and IgA is going to follow on the IGG literally in the next couple of weeks. So you're absolutely correct, and you will see that in an upcoming feature.
Love that. That's perfect timing and appreciate that question. So the next question is a bit of a long one, and I think there may be a few questions within this. So making predictions based on food-specific IgG totals is one of the reasons early IgG food sensitivity studies were so contradictory. Why measure inflammatory IgG1-3 combined with anti-inflammatory IgG4? If IgG, there's more to it. If IgG4 typically indicates IgE allergy reactivity, is it safe or appropriate to reintroduce those foods without further inflammation? IgG4 can also be associated with autoimmune conditions. You can't tell if you don't test IgE or IgG4 together, separate from IgG1-3, especially when the elimination of those IgG4 specific foods can reduce emissions in those autoimmune conditions.
Okay, there's a lot. Let me unpack that a little bit for you.
Please take your time. Let me know if you need me to reiterate part of it.
No, certainly agree overall. So let me just start. So the FIC test measures IgG 1 through 4. And where we agree wholeheartedly is that IgG 1 and 3 activate complement strongly. IgG 2 activates complement, albeit a little less strongly than IgG 1 and 3. Okay, IgG 4 does not activate complement at all. So it's more thought of IgG4 as a quotation mark good antibody. And that's because IgG4 can form an immune complex, but what happens is the immune complexes and that antigen can be removed quickly, mostly by various phagocytic cells. So having said that, again, we measure IgG 1 through 4. Now, if you are sensitive to a particular or test positive, let's say to a food, that person is correct in that we don't know if it's IgG 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them or some of them. But from a clinical perspective, what you want to do is you want to measure all the IgG, or this is our approach. And then based on that, the clinical recommendation is you're going to have to eliminate that food. So initially, you don't know, let's say if it's a 1 through 3 response, which causes the symptoms, or just a 4 response, which wouldn't. But when you do the elimination phase, here's what we see. And here's what the results from our study show is that a patient can be, let's say, sensitive to wheat, and you eliminate it from the diet, that's 6 to 8 weeks. Then you add it back on Monday and Tuesday. And the patient says, well, I added it back. There's no I feel fine. There are no symptoms at all. You try the same thing the next week. The patient says, I had normal portions Monday, Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday. I feel fine. So what that tells you, the elimination diet is the gold standard, and that wheat, whatever component in there, is not a trigger of that. And then most likely it's a G4 response. So then what we say is just rotate that food in the diet. It's not a trigger food, but again, the idea is to get the antibody load down, and IgG4 would be in that group. And so that's how you differentiate whether you have a food that triggers an antibody response that then is linked to the symptoms or not. So if you don't have symptoms, most likely it's G4, or certainly predominantly G4. Now, again, agree that IgG4 and IgGE and production are intimately intertwined, and you generally have one and the other together. So that's true. We do not test IgE at this lab or at KBMO at the current time. We've made choices to follow other product indications, and we took quite a while to develop the Zonulin assay, 3 years to be exact, and a lot of frustration. So certainly not easy. So we did that. So we did the G. Now we'll follow on with the A, and we've got another exciting marker for barrier function, which is occludin, that's going to follow on the Zonulin. So we focused on inflammation and barrier function as important indicators of food sensitivity. So IgE is just not on the R&D slate at this time, but certainly do agree IgG4 and IgE are involved in various parts. I mean, the other parts of food sensitivity, the other aspect people think that, oh, you get an IgE response to a certain food antigen, and that's it. Well, that's not true. You get IgE produced many times against a food antigen, and this has been demonstrated a number of times. You also get IgG produced. So the immune system, it doesn't follow the textbooks where it's either or. You get IgE or IgG. You see combined responses now. So a lot of times the overlap, you'll see somebody that has a pollen allergy, for instance, but those pollen antigens, especially like in birch, BET-V1, and chitinase enzymes that are in pollen, what happens is they have strong cross-reactivity with fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Why? Because the protein contains small stretches of amino acids which are identical or nearly so. So what happens is somebody has a pollen allergy, a so-called seasonal allergy, but what you see on our test is, oh, you'll see some reactivity to a fruit, a nut, or a vegetable. So kind of just be aware of that. So in the medical history, when someone, we recommend get the medical history, the diet, medications, and supplement history on these individuals when they come in. And so if the medical history says seasonal allergies, and you know that means IgE and pollen and mugwort and that sort of thing, and then you look sideways, you say, oh, you have some IgG sensitivities over here. Let's say the cantaloupe, and the person says, well, I don't eat cantaloupe. Most likely what you're looking at is a cross-reactivity of a pollen antigen or like antigen with some fruit that maybe the individual doesn't consume. So by knowing the diet, you'll be able to say, oh, that's probably a cross-reactivity, and this is why. The explanation is IgE sensitivity. And it's not a true food sensitivity per se, because you don't consume that particular fruit. But what we're picking up is an IgG response. So it's kind of, and that's, you know, I mean, it used to be that people just thought it was IgE and that's it, and no IgG. But I think a lot of the recent studies have shown that that's not true.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I appreciate that in-depth answer too. So last few questions here.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
How long might you expect a food reaction to show up on testing after it's been discontinued?
Good response. I mean, a good question. So what happens is the half-life of IgG antibodies, again, is 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the class and depending on the amount. So 3 to 4 weeks. So in 3 weeks, about half as much antibody is cleared from the serum. So, and et cetera. So that out there 3 months, 4 months, technically, theoretically, there shouldn't be any antibody in the serum. It should all be cleared. Now, immune complexes, on the other hand, are cleared from the body in, oh my God, in 5 to 10 minutes. So they are cleared rapidly. So what we say is typically you're out there 6 to 8 weeks, most of the antibody should be removed.
Okay, perfect. This next question is going to test my skills to pronounce some words, but it's okay. I did a semester of organic chemistry in college, so
good.
It's covered. Does this fit test show any cyclooxygenase or lipooxygenase enzymes? That's right.
No, you were very good on that. I can tell you got an A in that course. No, this test does not measure those directly or indirectly.
Perfect. Appreciate that. How often can the fit test be done?
Well, again, that's some patients. You know, you've got curious group that have financial wherewithal, let's say. So they can say, look, I'm curious, I'll get tested today and I'll go on my elimination diet in maybe 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, you know, so they will be frequent testers. Then you have other groups, and I generally recommend, mostly to save money, is look, if you have some food sensitivities, if you've eliminated them 6 or 8 months, you know, you can get tested at that point, or even at a year. No need to waste money. What you want to see there is you've done an elimination diet. Hopefully you're transitioning to better health. Your symptoms have been reduced, and that what you will see upon subsequent testing is a reduction in overall antibody response. So I would say wait, out that 8 to 12 months.
Yeah, perfect. And then last question, do you accept insurance for this test over at KBMO?
Excuse me, what type?
Is this test covered by insurance? We had that question asked a couple of times.
Not at the current time. No, it is not. We don't accept insurance.
Yeah, and that speaks as well for Rupa Health. I think if you're a practitioner who's familiar with just the functional medicine landscape, these tests and just insurance in general is a bit of a complex way of going about paying for a lot of different tests. So, with that, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, as well as Dr. Dorval. Thank you so much for joining us today. Any final thoughts or things you want to get out there?
No, it was a pleasure to offer this presentation to everyone. And what I would say is look to the future and the upcoming products that we're going to have, the Zonulin IgA, as well as occludin IgG and IgA. And we've got some other new products in the pipeline as well. And just by way of mentioning, we also offer the FAST test, which is a food antigen test where 1 drop of blood, and in about 6 minutes, you can determine the sensitivity to egg, milk, and wheat. So this is a rapid test that's offered by the company. People really like this. So just 1 drop of blood, 6 minutes later, and you can cover a lot of food sensitivities in the egg, milk, and wheat. So please keep that in mind.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Dorval. That was an amazing presentation. And we'll be sending out a copy of the recording as well as the slides within the coming days. But we appreciate you hopping on. And for those of you who are available for the next, say, 10 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into Rupa Health and show you exactly how we can order the tests that were talked about today directly through our platform. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can just jump right in. So for those of you who are curious about Rupa Health and who we are, what we do, why we're here today, we are a platform that's designed to make it easier when it comes to your ordering of the lab tests. We work with over 25 different labs, of course, including KBMO, so you can order all of your tests in one place, as well as track and manage and view the results. It's free to sign up for and just takes a minute or so to sign up. You can use this little QR code over my right shoulder, left shoulder. I have it flipped, so I'm not positive over which shoulder it's over right now. But you can scan that QR code and visit our platform. As you can see, some of these little labs floating down to the bottom are the ones that we work with. But let's just jump in and show you exactly what it looks like. So this is Rupa Health. As I mentioned, we work with over 25 different labs, including KBMO, making it as easy as possible for you to not only track and order and place your labs, but also managing the patient experience. So as soon as you place an order on Rupa, we can effectively take it from there. We can manage billing directly with your patients. We'll send over curated FAQs, instructions, oftentimes videos on how to take the tests. We'll manage any specimen issues that come arise. We can even coordinate phlebotomies if it's required. So just to show you really how easy it is to start an order on Rupa, we have this button here, start an order. We just need the patient's first name, last name, email address. From there, it'll take us directly to our order screen. And this is what the order screen looks like. Up at the top, we can create custom bundles, a custom bundle being a set of blood panels, a set of tests from any combination of the 25 plus labs that we work with. That way it's one click and all of your tests can be added into your cart straight away. Below that, you can create a favorites list. So a favorites list comprises of just individual tests that you're commonly ordering. So you don't have to search through the entire catalog of 2,000 tests every single time to place your orders. Beyond that, you don't have to log into each individual portal to place your orders, right? Most importantly, you don't have to have so many different logins, just one login with Rupa Health, and it's there available for you. So with that, I have my KBMO Fit 176 test available right here. Just one click of the button, and it'll appear over in my cart. And then from there, if I want to add that Zonulin straight away, it's available for me to add on. It's as simple as that, right? And then if I want any additional details, such as a sample report or a copy of the patient instructions, that's here for me as well. And any of the biomarkers, right? Let's check out what all 176 of the test, like what is going to test within this, you have insight into all of the 176 straight away. From there, it's as simple as clicking send to patient. And that's how you're able to order this test from KBMO within a matter of seconds directly from Rupa Health. But if you are interested, of course, in adding additional tests to your order, let's say maybe you want to do an organic acids test for our patients, it's as simple as, again, we have it right at our fingertips. So there's, of course, a little bit more detail that we can do with these different tests. I just wanted to show you really how simple it is to send an order to your patients. But let's chat about it, right? We already looked at the add-on test. So if we wanted to add Zonulin, this button will appear straight away. I can schedule an order as well. So let's say that, hey, I want to retest my patient 6 months down the line to see if, these food sensitivities have made any adjustments. I can actually schedule this order directly through Rupa Health. So that way it automates it, one less thing off your plate. You have the option of paying for the order. It will default to actually having the patient pay for the order, so you don't have to manage billing, but you do have the option of the patient or of you paying for the order and billing the patient outside of our platform. You can add notes for the patient. This can be anything that you want the patient to know. You can add notes for Rupa. You can even add ICD-10 codes. So while these orders aren't covered by insurance, typically directly through Rupa or through KBMO directly, you can still add ICD codes to the order, and we'll go ahead and send over a template to the patient, walking them through how to generate their super bill and submit that for reimbursement after the fact. But if nothing else, it's as simple as clicking send to patient, as I showed you earlier. And that's how you're able to order from 25 plus labs, 2,000 plus tests, all at your fingertips in a matter of seconds through Rupa Health. Now, of course, there's much more to Rupa Health beyond just being able to place your orders. You're able to track all your orders in one spot as well. So here's this order we just created up at the top, but any of my in progress orders, I can click into them at any time and get an idea as to where they currently stand. I can see when the sample arrived at the lab. I am able to get an update if they provide it as to when I can estimate the results to come in. If there's any delay or specimen issue, things like that, we will provide clear lines of communication directly to you, directly to the patient. So you'll always be in the know as to what the status of your tests are with the patient and can plan accordingly. From there, you're alerted as the results come in and you're able to view them all within Rupa Health. So once the results are in, as each individual test comes in, you'll be alerted. You can download them. You can send the results directly to the patient. We will go ahead and not send them to the patient. So you have full control. We're not going to send the results to the patient. You can schedule a clinical consultation. So should you need some assistance interpreting the results, you can schedule some time directly with the lab. And if there's a digital requisition available, we'll go ahead and add that up in here as well. Now, note that we are not making any adjustments to the results themselves. They're the same exact results that you'd be getting directly from the lab. What we're providing is a software that just makes it easier, right? Everything in one place. That's what everyone wants. It makes it more efficient. You're spending less time managing all the admin work and able to spend more time actually focusing on your patients. That's the idea here, is we're providing that service to allow you to focus on actually growing your business and the not so fun parts. So what I've shown you so far: how to place your orders on Rupa Health from 25 plus labs, of course, including KBMO, how to track all your orders. Now, what I'm going to show you is actually probably equally as important, if not more important, for a lot of providers that I speak with. And that's the patient experience. The patient experience can be not so fun. I mean, let's face it, you're sending these patients tests that probably the easiest one to do is pricking your finger, right? And that's not fun, let alone pooping into a cup, right? So with that tends to come a lot of questions. And we want to offload a lot of that heavy lifting off of your shoulders onto ours. So what do? As soon as you place that order for your patient, we can effectively take it from there. We'll reach out to the patient, let them know that the tests have been ordered from them. Of course, you're going to want to let the patient know that Rupa will be managing everything when it comes to the patient experience. We'll ship out the kits within 24 hours of payment. So a big call out here is we won't ship the kits out until payment is received. From there, we'll send over curated FAQs, instructions, videos oftentimes to the patient on how to take the test. We'll follow up with the patient. Again, another step that I feel like can oftentimes just fall by the wayside because you as a practitioner are busy and follow-ups can take time and they might not be the most important thing on your schedule for that day. So we'll automate that process for you. And then from there, you're notified as the results come in. All of this is a process that's designed to provide a service that's come to be expected in 2022, right? People want to be able to just text, right? They want to just be able to respond in email. They want to be able to just get these service at their fingertips. And it's providing a more efficient and effective experience for everyone involved. Our compliance rates are up above 85%, so they're very high. And so with that, let's chat about and look at what it actually looks like. So this is the email that will be sent to your patients, assuming they are the ones that are going to be paying for the order. So hi, Joshua, Dr. Jordan has ordered these tests for you. We'll introduce who we are, and then we'll actually highlight the different payment options that we accept. So another really cool thing to call out here is not only can we accept cash and credit for these labs, but we can accept HSA, FSA, and we can even set up a 3-month interest-free payment plan with the patient. So I mean, it's pretty awesome, right? These tests, as I'm sure you know, if you've ordered them before, they can be very expensive. So really anything that we can do to help lower the barrier of entry to get access to these oftentimes very expensive tests is better for everybody involved, right? From there, we'll collect all the necessary information to complete the order, billing information, of course, shipping information, and demographic information. We'll highlight, of course, all the tests that were ordered for them and break down all of the costs associated to them. If you decide to pay for the tests and bill the patient outside of our platform, we, of course, offer that as a service as well. Nothing changes with the patient experience. We still want to manage that end to end, but we're going to refrain from showing some very important information, of course, that being price. So with that, we're not going to collect any billing information. So from there, we'll send over an email that looks similar to this, outlining instructions on how to take the test, as well as instructions on how to fill out the requisition form. If there's a phlebotomy required, we can help coordinate that directly with the patient as well. We'll send over options based on the lab that they're working with and that network provided by the lab, or we can customize the information based on your recommendation. That said, should the patient have any questions throughout this entire process, whether it's how to take the test or they simply just want additional options for phlebotomists or blood draw locations in their area, they'll reach out to us and our team and we'll facilitate answering those questions on your behalf. Now, this is especially important for those practitioners who are maybe practicing telehealth, right? You're a telehealth provider, maybe you don't know where a blood draw location might be out of your area, out of your network. So we will help coordinate that directly with the patient. Now, of course, if there is any medical questions, we will send the patient back your way with those questions, but anything in regards to just taking the test, we'll facilitate that again, so you don't have to. And then from there, we'll follow up, of course, as I mentioned previously, and you will be alerted as the results come in, like I showed you before. So with that, those are really the core components of Rupa Health. There's more to it than just that, but what you've seen so far is really how simple it is to place an order on Rupa Health, how to track and manage all your results, and then the patient experience. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does this all cost? Very important question. Of course, I want to talk about that. So let's chat about it. Rupa Health is a free platform to sign up for. The way that we generate our revenue is very straightforward. There's a 7% processing and ordering fee on each order, and that's paid for by whoever's paying for the tests. Now, what that means is if you're having Rupa bill the patient directly and manage billing, then the patient will be the one absorbing this cost. For you, what that means is that Rupa is a free platform. The only time you would ever pay anything to Rupa Health is if you decide to pay for the order yourself, right? And in that case, you click this box and manage billings outside of our platform. It doesn't adjust any cost, whether you're paying or the patient's paying, it's the same exact cost. Now, let's say that you're ordering a GI map, for example. We offer wholesale practitioner prices. So the same prices that you would get having an account directly with the labs, those are the same prices that we offer here as well. So if you're a practitioner who is referring your patients to pay the labs directly, we're going to be saving your patients money, point blank. So that's how we generate our revenue. Again, just a flat 7% processing ordering fee. It's free to sign up for. There's no subscription cost. There's no sign-up fee, anything of that nature, just the 7%. But Rupa is more than just a place where you can just come and place your orders. You're all actually a part of the content that we're putting out. So for example, Rupa University. Rupa University is actually what you're in right now. It is a series of live classes that we host on a weekly basis where we invite practitioners or influencers within the medical landscape to come give talks that are regarding important topics, right? So for example, you just experienced one with Dr. Dorval. If you hop into Rupa University, you can see all of our upcoming classes as well. We have one with Dr. Carrie Jones coming up next week, which we're super excited about. She's actually our head of medical education, and you're able to join these on a weekly basis. If not, we always record them and send them out post, right? But you'll have access to all of the recordings within this. Additionally, beyond that, we have full support center, support staff. We can set things up in a clinic environment. So you're a part of a clinic with multiple practitioners, or you have a physician's assistant. We can have them on the accounts. You have their own logins, so on and so forth. So there's a ton here at Rupa Health. We're consistently putting out content. We have a podcast, a magazine, you name it. So beyond just a place where you can order all your labs, it's a place where you can come and continue to learn and continue to grow within the functional medicine landscape. So with that, my name is Adrian Martinez. I am the head of practitioner partnerships here at Rupa Health. If you have any questions or want to set up a follow-up call with me to dive deeper into how Rupa can actually fit within your business, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm actually going to reach out to you later on this afternoon. So if you have any questions or want to set up some time, this is my contact information. But with that, y'all, thank you so much for joining me this Wednesday afternoon. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Take care.